Good afternoon. This is the PowerPoint on stocks and the stock market. When you open it up, you will be in this sort of view. You can go through it in this view by just scrolling down, or you can come up here to where it says Open Google Slides. If you click on it, then you open it up in a view that looks like this. I'm going to do this video in this view so that I can highlight things as I talk about them. So once again, this is a video on the stock and stock market. So when you hear people talking about, I'm going to go buy stocks, exactly what are you buying when you buy stocks? When you buy stocks, what you're buying is a piece of the company or partial ownership of the company. So if you ever hear about a company that is private, what it means is it's a company that's owned by one individual or a couple individuals or maybe a family. Example, if you open up a restaurant, it is a private company, that restaurant. Those private companies will not be listed on the stock market. Those are not stock market companies. When you have a private company and you eventually want to go public, going public means that you go and have your private company listed on the stock exchange and you end up selling pieces of it to the public. That's why it's called going public. So it is public companies that are listed on the stock market exchange. And the way this works is when a private company decides to go public, what they do is they divide their company into a certain number of pieces. Each piece is called a share. And they don't necessarily have to sell all the shares or all the pieces. They can just sell a portion of them. And so what the company then does is the company will sell those pieces or shares to investors. The word investor is just people who are out there looking to put some of their money into the stock market to buy pieces of companies. So the investor gives their money over to the company, and in exchange, the investor will get partial ownership of the company, will get shares. So later on, after this happens, if the company actually ends up making money, money is called profit. If they're then actually making profit, then the company can give some of that money to investors, or even if they don't do that directly, the value of the company's shares should go up anyways. I.e., then the value of the piece that you bought goes up in value as well. So why do companies do this? Why do private companies go public and sell pieces of themselves? The main reason for companies to do this is by selling pieces of themselves, they end up bringing in a lot of money. And that money could then be used to maybe grow the company. Either you expand your operations, you go, you put that money into research, you pay down debt you might have incurred. And for people who sell pieces of the company for that purpose, for people who go public for that purpose, in their head, the calculation is that that money that they get will allow the company to grow fast enough that it will make up for the fact that they don't own as much of the company anymore. Also, the idea behind going public is that the owners are able to turn a piece of that company into cash. For example, Mark Zuckerberg, when he founded Facebook before it went public, it was his very first job, as best as I know. So before he sold pieces of the company, before the company went public, he probably didn't actually have very much cash to live his life. But eventually, when he decided to sell a piece of the company, he could turn that non-liquid company, he can turn that piece of the company into readily available cash he can do to buy houses or whatever else he wanted to do with his money. Okay, moving on. So why do investors buy shares? So the reason that most investors buy shares is to make money. Um, and there are a few different ways that um, investors make money by owning shares. One, when the company ends up making money, they can give the money directly to the people who own the shares. Uh, Doing that is called dividends. That money is called dividends. Two, even if the company keeps the money, that usually causes the price of the shares to go up. And if you want, the shareholder could then sell their shares to get that money, or you keep the share and watch it continue to grow in value. Three, this has been something that has happened a lot in recent years. The company can choose to buy back um, shares of their own company. I'll give you an example. Let's say that that restaurant that went public, let's say he divided it into 100 shares. That means each share is 1% of the company's ownership. And let's say the restaurant does really well, makes $1 million. It could use that money to buy back some of its shares. And by doing so, this will raise the prices of the remaining shares. I want you guys to think for a second, why would buying back your own shares raise the price of the remaining shares? So pause the video at this point, figure that out. Okay, so why does this cause the price of the remaining shares to go up? In our restaurant example, let's say they use that $1 million to buy back 50 of the 100 available shares. So once they buy it back, that means out there's only 50 shares left. And so that means each share is now worth 2% of the company. And any future dividends or things like that will be divided amongst only 50 shares instead of the 100 shares. Okay, so when you buy a share, that gives the shareholder, the person who owns a share, is called shareholder. When you buy a share, the shareholder is given certain rights. Like we already said, he is now a partial owner, and each share is given an equal dividend. So if you own 50 shares and someone else owns 50 shares, you guys should be receiving the same amount of money when dividends are distributed. Also, since you are a partial owner, you have partial say in what happens to the company. You are able to vote on certain things, and the majority wins. And each share gives you one vote. So if you have 50 shares and someone has 25 shares, you basically have twice as many votes as they do. So that's how you make money in the stock market. You buy shares, you get dividends, or the share prices increases, and eventually you sell it. How do you lose money in the stock market? Well, one way is you end up buying the shares, the price of the shares go down, and then you sell it for less than you bought it for. It is possible to lose all the money you invest in the stock market in this way. An example is that in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the stock market has gone down 30% on average. So if you had money in the stock market, you probably lost a good chunk of it over the last month. Another way you could lose money in the stock market, let's say once again, let's use that restaurant example. So let's say there's 100 shares to this restaurant. So each share is the equivalent of 1% of the company. And let's say that company decides to go out and sell more shares. Let's say the company goes out and sells another 100 shares to new investors. Okay, so that means there are 200 shares out there now. So that means each share is only worth 0.5% of the company. So most likely your dividend will also be cut in half. All right. One other cost to doing business in the stock market, or to all this buying and selling, is transaction costs. Transaction costs are basically the costs that happens whenever you buy or sell any shares. There are two costs. There is a fixed cost. So this is a dollar amount that is always the same, basically, regardless of how many shares you buy or sell. I think there's an upper limit, like 10,000 shares. If you buy more than 10,000 shares, it might go up. But in general, for most people, there's this fixed amount that you will have to pay whenever you buy or sell. Example, when I E-Trade in the year 2000 was charging something like $9 per buy or per sell. There's actually some companies now that have eliminated this, so that there is no more fixed fee when you trade. Instead, they make their money off of you in a different way. So okay, so you have that fixed cost, and you also have something called the spread that you end up paying. And the spread is the difference between the buy and sell price. And here, the more shares you buy or the more shares you sell, the more you have to pay. And you don't actually pay this money directly. You just pay it in sort of lost profit per share. Let me give you an example of the spread. So here we have the company Walmart, and if we go down here to where it says bid and ask, okay, so if you were to go and try to buy a share of Walmart right now, you'd have to pay this price. But even if you bought it and then here is how much you can get for selling a share of Walmart right now. And this is in real time. So if you were to buy a share and then literally sell it, 0.1 second later, you'd actually still lose money. You'd lose 13 cents, the difference between these two. So you lose 13 cents per share that you of Walmart that you bought and sold. So that right there is called the spread, and that's sort of transaction cost. Okay, there are the next two slides is something that's used less often. One thing is margin buying. Margin buying is basically you borrow money in order to buy stocks. By doing this, you amplify how much money you would make or lose. This is in general considered pretty risky thing to do, partially because you have to borrow money in order to actually do it. So if you make money but you don't make as much as the cost of borrowing that extra money, you still lose. Right? The next thing is super detailed, but there's something called puts and gets, and for all intents and purposes, this is legal gambling. You basically guess which direction the price of a company is going to go, and you make or lose money depending on if you are correct. This is probably one of the riskiest things you can do with your money in the stock market. This is for amateurs. This is very, very risky. Okay, at this point, I'm going to stop this video. Go open up your worksheet and come back to this video in part 2.